I never imagined the night my son rose to power would be the night he buried me in humiliation. The ballroom shimmered with gold light, crystal glasses, and applause that didn't belong to me. Luca stood on stage, confident and sharp in his tailored suit, the image of everything I'd once hoped he'd become. Then he turned toward me. His smile sharpened into something cruel. "You're nothing but a useless old man," he said, voice echoing through the hall. "You should have been gone a long time ago." Laughter erupted, loud, hollow, merciless. I felt every chuckle slice deeper than words ever could. My hands trembled, but I didn't rise, didn't shout. I simply stared at the son who had forgotten where he came from. And then, through the noise, a quiet voice beside me whispered, "Mr. Ward, this is for you." A sealed envelope. A secret. And everything changed. When Luca was born, I thought I'd done something right in this world. I remember holding him in my arms for the first time, so small and fragile, his entire life ahead of him. I whispered promises into that tiny ear that I'd give him everything I never had, that he'd never know the hunger, fear, or loneliness that shaped me. And I meant it. For decades, I built Ward and Company. From the ground up. I was the kind of man who worked through the night while others slept, who took every risk that could make or break a family. My wife, Eleanor, stood beside me through all of it, a graceful, patient woman who somehow managed to turn our house into a home even when I was never there. We lived in comfort, yes, but it was built on years of exhaustion and sacrifice. Luca grew up surrounded by all of it, the privilege, the polish, the illusion of control. I tried to teach him gratitude, humility, discipline. He learned power instead. As a boy, he was charming, bright, magnetic, the kind of child who could talk his way out of anything. Teachers adored him. Friends followed him. I used to think his confidence would make him a great leader one day. I didn't realize it would also make him cruel. By the time he turned 30, Luca had already stepped into the company with a kind of arrogance I'd never seen before. He didn't want guidance. He wanted the throne. "Dad," he once told me, "your way is the past. I'm the future." I laughed then, thinking it was youthful pride. But over time, that pride turned into disdain, not just for the business, but for me. When I retired, I thought stepping aside would bring us closer. I imagined quiet dinners, long talks about life, maybe even hearing him say he appreciated what I'd built. Instead, he called my retirement long overdue. He stopped visiting, stopped calling, stopped being my son. I became a ghost in the mansion I'd paid for, watching him host meetings and parties with people who didn't even know my name. Eleanor tried to bridge the gap. She'd say, "Declan, he's young. He just wants to prove himself." But the proof came at a cost. He stopped seeking advice and started seeking applause. And the world gave it to him. Magazines wrote about Luca Ward, the prodigy who redefined American enterprise. They called him visionary, modern, relentless. I read every word in silence, half proud, half hollow. The night of his celebration, the night that would later tear open every wound I thought had healed, started like every corporate gala I'd endured in my life. The chandeliers glowed like stars. Champagne flowed endlessly. Strangers toasted to success they didn't build. I sat at the end of a long table, watching Luca charm the crowd, every smile rehearsed, every laugh precise. He looked like me once, the same jawline, the same fire in his eyes. But where my fire had been lit by purpose, his burned for recognition. He didn't see people, he saw mirrors reflecting his greatness. And that night, he didn't see me as his father, just an old man who no longer mattered. When he raised his glass and thanked everyone who made me who I am, I waited for him to glance at me. He didn't. Not even once. I suppose that was the moment I realized something fundamental: you can give a child everything you own, but you can't give them humility. And as the applause thundered around him, I sat perfectly still, wondering how something I created could look so much like me yet feel like a stranger entirely. The laughter that would humiliate me hadn't come yet. But I could already feel it on the horizon, like the slow rumble of a storm that knows exactly where it's going to strike. The night of Luca's celebration was supposed to be a milestone, at least that's what the invitation said, a night honoring innovation, legacy, and leadership. Ironically, I was the only one in the room who had built the very legacy they were honoring. The ballroom glistened like something out of a glossy magazine. Gold drapes shimmered in the soft light, waiters moved like clockwork, and a jazz quartet played a rhythm that seemed too smooth for the storm brewing in my chest. Luca stood at the center of it all, shaking hands with investors, laughing too loudly, his every gesture calculated for admiration. He was surrounded by people who called him Sir, men twice his age bending slightly when he spoke. I sat at the end of a long table with Eleanor beside me, smiling politely through conversations that had nothing to do with her. Her hand brushed mine, a silent comfort, though her eyes betrayed unease. We both knew our son had changed, but neither of us knew how far he'd gone. I noticed the way guests whispered as they passed. Some nodded respectfully, others barely looked at me at all. In a room built on my sweat and sacrifice, I was invisible. Luca had done more than take my company, he'd rewritten its history, trimming me out like a character that no longer served the plot. The moment came near the end of the evening. Blake Avery, the host and Luca's closest ally, clinked his glass for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice rich and smug, "tonight we celebrate not only business success but the future of Ward Enterprises under its brilliant leader Luca Ward." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Luca raised his glass, basking in the noise. He began his speech confident, charming, practiced. He spoke about vision. About courage. About overcoming old systems and outdated philosophies. Every line was a dagger wrapped in silk, every word designed to sound like innovation while quietly discrediting everything I stood for. I kept my eyes on him, trying to find the son I once knew beneath the rehearsed performance. But that boy, the one who used to fall asleep on my shoulder, who once said, "Dad, I want to be just like you," he wasn't there. Then it happened. Luca paused, smiled, and turned his gaze toward me. His expression shifted, cold and deliberate. The crowd fell into expectant silence. I didn't know what was coming, but something in me braced for impact. He raised his glass toward me and said, "Tonight, I want to acknowledge my father, Declan Ward." Polite applause followed. I nodded slightly, unsure whether to be proud or afraid. Luca continued, his smile tightening. "My father, well, he was once a great man. Built an empire from scratch. But let's be honest, every empire needs to fall before something new can rise. He's an old man now. Stuck in the past. A relic." A few awkward chuckles rippled through the room. He wasn't finished. He sits there tonight, proud, maybe even thinking he's part of this. But he isn't. He's just lucky to be here. Truth is, the company thrived the moment he stepped aside. I guess some people just live too long to realize when their time is up. The laughter came in waves, this time loud, unrestrained, cruel. Glasses clinked, a few guests even cheered as if it were comedy. I felt Eleanor's fingers tighten around mine. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, but she said nothing. My body froze. The words didn't just hurt, they hollowed me out. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears, the music faltering, the laughter echoing off marble walls that once felt like home. I wanted to stand. I wanted to tell him what respect meant, what love once looked like. But my legs refused to move. My throat burned with shame. I saw flashes of my life every late night, every deal, every moment I thought I was building a future for him. Now that future was mocking me in a custom-tailored suit. When the laughter died down, Luca smirked, leaned into the microphone, and added softly. "Don't take it personally, Dad. You've had your time." He turned away, triumphant. The crowd clapped again, moving on as though nothing had happened. But something inside me had something that wouldn't stay buried much longer. Because just as I lowered my eyes, a hand brushed my shoulder. Gareth Holt, my old friend and attorney, leaned down and whispered. Declan, stay seated. There's something you need to see. And in his hand was an envelope thick, sealed, and stamped with a crest I hadn't seen in 20 years. For years I had swallowed my pride in silence. I had endured slights, dismissals, and a slow erosion of respect from the very person I'd given my life to raise. But as I stared at that letter, the thick paper, the wax seal now broken, something in me snapped into focus. It wasn't rage. It wasn't vengeance. It was clarity. I rose from my chair, the envelope in my hand. The chatter in the room softened as if the air itself had shifted. I could feel hundreds of eyes following me as I stepped toward the stage where my son stood, smiling under the bright lights that made him look like a king. Dad, Luca said, his grin forced, a hint of annoyance behind it. Please, sit down. Don't make this awkward. Awkward? I echoed, my voice calm but steady. I've spent half my life walking on eggshells around your pride, son. I think we've already passed awkward. A nervous laugh ran through the audience, that shallow, uneasy kind of laughter people give when they sense they're witnessing something they shouldn't. I climbed a few steps up to the stage. The letter trembled slightly in my fingers, but my voice didn't. You've had your say, Luca. You've told this room what I am, a useless old man who should have been gone long ago. Tonight, you made a spectacle of your father. But if we're putting on a show, let's make sure everyone hears the truth. The host, Blake Avery, stepped forward, trying to defuse the tension. Mr. Ward, maybe we should continue this later. Later? I cut in. I've spent years waiting for later. The room fell silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the quiet clink of a glass being set down somewhere in the back. I turned toward the audience, not toward my son. Most of you know me as the founder of Ward and Company. You know the headlines, the public story, the one that says I retired and passed everything to the next generation. But what you don't know, I said, raising the letter, is that there's another story. One that was kept hidden until tonight. Luca shifted behind me, his voice dripping with condescension. Dad, you're embarrassing yourself. No one cares about your old letters. I faced him, the spotlight washing over both of us, father and son, past and present. Maybe not. But they'll care about what's written in this one. Eleanor rose slowly from her seat near the front, her hand pressed to her lips. Gareth, standing at the edge of the crowd, gave a small nod, a silent encouragement. I took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. This letter was written by Theodore Langston, the man whose investments kept this company alive long before Luca turned it into a brand. Theodore was more than a business partner. He was a man of honor, a man who made a promise to me 20 years ago. Tonight, I'm here to honor that promise. Murmurs rippled across the ballroom. Guests leaned in. Cameras pointed. The same crowd that had laughed at me minutes ago now listened with rapt attention. I unfolded the paper, the edges trembling only slightly, and began to read. To my dearest friend, Declan Ward. If you are reading this, it means I have kept my word. I leave you not just my gratitude, but the proof of your own integrity. You once saved my company when I had nothing left. I merged my holdings under your name, quietly and permanently. You built Ward and Company. With your sweat, but you saved it with your heart. Do not let the ungrateful rewrite what you built. Gasps filled the air. Someone whispered, merged. Under his name. Luca's laughter came sharp and forced. This is absurd. You expect people to believe. Gareth stepped forward, holding a matching document folder. Believe it, he said. The paperwork was notarized and held in trust. Mr. Langston instructed me to deliver it upon your father's humiliation. His exact words, Luca. When the world forgets who Declan Ward is, remind them. Luca's smirk collapsed. I lowered the letter. You wanted this night to be about your success. Maybe it still is. Because tonight, the truth finally succeeds. For a long, breathless moment, the room was completely still. The chandeliers glittered like suspended stars, frozen in disbelief. I could hear my heart beating, but it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from peace, the kind that comes only when silence finally breaks. I looked at my son, not with anger, but with a sadness so deep it almost felt merciful. You once asked me why I never fought back when people underestimated me. It's because I never needed to. The truth always fights for itself. I turned to the crowd, my voice steady and calm. Tonight, that truth finally speaks. The moment my voice touched the microphone, the sound sliced through the chatter like a blade. Conversations froze. The band stopped mid-note. All eyes turned toward the old man who, moments earlier, had been the butt of the evening's cruelest joke. Before my son continues his celebration, I began, keeping my tone calm, I'd like to share something with all of you. Luca's confident grin faltered. His brow creased. Dad, he said through clenched teeth, now isn't the time. Oh, I think it is, I replied evenly. You see, I've just received a letter, one that has been waiting for 20 years to be opened. And since this night seems to be about legacy, perhaps we should talk about where it truly came from. A hush swept across the room. Even the servers froze mid-step. I held up the letter, its gold crest glinting in the chandelier light. This, I continued, was written by Theodore Langston, the man whose company helped build the foundation of what you now call Ward Enterprises. A ripple of recognition moved through the guests. The older executives shifted uncomfortably. They remembered Langston, the man who had vanished into bankruptcy before Luca's generation ever took over. Luca tried to recover his composure, forcing a tight smile. Dad, please, he said, his voice trying to sound amused, we don't need a history lesson tonight. No, I said, stepping closer to the center of the room, what we need is the truth. The microphone amplified my words, turning them heavy, deliberate, and inescapable. If you're reading this, Declan, I read aloud, it means the promise I made you must finally be honored. You once saved my company and my name. I repaid you by merging our fortunes under yours, though your humility prevented you from claiming it. The shares I transferred, the contracts I signed, all belong to you and those who come after you. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Murmurs began to spread. Some guests turned toward Luca, confusion etched on their faces. I continued. You built Ward and Company, but you also built Langston Holdings. The two are now one. And if anyone doubts it, this letter and the attached legal documentation confirm your rightful ownership. You are and will always be the true founder and majority holder of what is now Ward Enterprises. The words struck like thunder. Gasps echoed through the hall. I could see the disbelief on their faces, the same faces that had laughed minutes before. Luca's jaw clenched. This is insane, he spat. You can't just walk in here with some old letter and... Before he could finish, Gareth stepped forward, his presence commanding silence. He's not walking in with some old letter, Luca, he said, his voice low but powerful. He's presenting a notarized, sealed directive accompanied by transfer records signed by Theodore Langston himself. I was one of the legal witnesses. The color drained from my son's face. That's impossible, he said. It's not, Gareth replied. You've been running a company that legally belongs to your father. The crowd erupted, whispers, gasps, the metallic clatter of a dropped glass somewhere near the bar. I stood there, still, the letter trembling only slightly in my hand. The same people who had mocked me minutes ago were now turning to one another in shock, trying to comprehend what had just unfolded. Eleanor stood at the edge of the crowd, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. She looked both heartbroken and proud, as if years of quiet suffering had finally found their voice through me. Luca stepped forward, voice trembling with anger. You planned this. Both of you. You waited for this moment to humiliate me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw not arrogance, not cruelty, but fear. Humiliation. I said softly. No, son. I've lived through that tonight. This isn't revenge. This is correction. Gareth handed the documents to the nearest investor. You can verify the seals, the dates, the signatures, he said. Everything is legal. Everything is binding. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. Luca looked around, desperate for someone to defend him, but no one did. I lowered the microphone. You said earlier that I was a relic, that I'd lived too long to realize my time was over. But you were wrong, Luca. I didn't live too long. I lived just long enough. And with that, I folded the letter, placed it gently back into its envelope, and stepped down from the stage. The applause didn't come immediately. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was quieter, heavier, the sound of truth finally finding its place after years of silence. Behind me, I heard my son whisper something I couldn't make out. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The night that began as his triumph had just become my reckoning, and there was still one more truth left to be spoken before it was over. For a few long seconds, no one moved. The chandeliers glimmered above a ballroom frozen mid-breath, and the only sound I could hear was the soft hum of the microphone in my hand. Then Luca laughed, sharp, hollow, defiant. Enough of this, he barked. You all really believe some dusty letter? My father's losing his mind. This is pathetic. His voice cracked halfway through the sentence. It wasn't confidence anymore, it was desperation. Luca, I said quietly, stop before you say something you can't take back. Take back. He stepped forward, his face flushed red. You humiliated me in front of every partner I've built. You planned this. You waited until tonight to. Gareth cut in from the crowd, his calm presence commanding the same attention Luca was trying to force. Declan didn't plan this. Theodore Langston did. And I can prove it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out another envelope, thicker, stamped with an official state seal. These, he said, raising the documents for all to see, are certified transfer records filed 19 years ago with the state registrar. They show the merger between Langston Holdings and Ward and Company. Under the name of Declan Ward. There's a video statement attached, recorded by Langston himself before he passed away. Luca's hand twitched. You're bluffing. I don't bluff, Gareth replied. The lawyer turned to the nearest technician at the event's AV desk. Within seconds, the massive screens behind the stage flickered to life. The crowd murmured as a grainy video began to play. An older man in a gray suit appeared, sitting behind a mahogany desk. It was Theodore Langston. If you're seeing this, he said in the recording, then I am gone, and Declan Ward's name has been unjustly diminished. The Ward legacy stands because of him, not despite him. Let there be no question, the controlling shares, the merged rights, and the moral ownership belong to Declan. His integrity deserves the recognition my silence once denied. The video ended. Silence followed, thicker than any applause could ever be. Luca's shoulders slumped, his polished image beginning to fracture. No, he muttered, shaking his head. This can't, it doesn't. I stepped toward him, close enough that I could see the panic behind his eyes. It does, son. You built your success on my foundation, and I never asked for credit. But tonight, when you mocked me in front of the world, you forced the truth out of its grave. He turned to the guests, searching for sympathy, for someone to laugh, to nod, but they avoided his gaze. The same crowd that had roared with laughter now stared at him in silence, ashamed of their own applause. Eleanor stood near the front, tears shining on her cheeks. She whispered, Declan, please. I looked at her, the only steady thing in a life built on shifting ground, and gave a slight nod. I'm not here to destroy him, I said softly into the mic. I'm here to remind him and all of you that power without respect is nothing. Luca snapped. You're pathetic. You think this makes you some kind of hero? You're a bitter old man clinging to the past. Maybe, I said, setting the letter down on the podium. But at least I remember who gave me my name. His voice broke then. You don't understand. I did this for the family, for the future. You were done, Dad. You were irrelevant. The anger drained from his words, leaving only fear. The kind of fear that comes when a man sees the tower he built start to crumble from the inside. I lowered the microphone, stepped close enough for only him to hear. Irrelevant, I repeated. You used that word so easily. But what's a future without the past that built it? His eyes glossed over, pride cracking into something raw. For the first time that night, he looked like a son again, lost, trembling, ashamed. The investors began to whisper among themselves, but I raised my hand to stop them. No, I said firmly. There will be no spectacle tonight. We've all seen enough. Then, louder, for everyone to hear, I am reinstating my position within Ward Enterprises. But I won't do it to erase my son. I'll do it to rebuild what arrogance nearly destroyed. Luca swallowed hard. You're forgiving me? I'm giving you another chance, I said quietly. Because you're my son. Because I once promised your mother that I'd never let this name be the reason we lost you. His voice cracked. I don't deserve it. Neither did I deserve the words you said, I replied, but here we are. The crowd broke into restrained applause, soft at first, then steady. It wasn't the kind of applause people give a hero. It was the kind you give to truth when it finally shows its face. Luca stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor. I turned to Eleanor, and for the first time in years, she smiled, small, sad, and proud all at once. As I stepped down from the stage, the letter still resting on the podium behind me, I realized something simple: I hadn't come to reclaim power. I'd come to reclaim peace. And for the first time in decades, I finally had it. When the lights dimmed and the music returned in an awkward hush, the room no longer belonged to Luca. The champagne that once symbolized victory now sat untouched, the ice melting into dull water. People moved quietly, whispering in corners, avoiding my son's eyes as though proximity might stain them with guilt. The celebration had died. What remained was an uncomfortable reckoning. Eleanor was the first to move. She stepped out from her seat and crossed the room slowly, the train of her navy gown brushing against the marble floor. She didn't look at the guests or the cameras. Her eyes were only on me. When she reached the stage, she took my hand, the same way she had when we were young and uncertain and full of dreams we never spoke aloud. Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to carry. Declan, she said softly, I've never seen you stand so tall. I squeezed her hand. Maybe I should have done it sooner, I whispered back. She shook her head. No. You did it when it mattered most. Behind her, Gareth was already speaking to the event staff, arranging the verification of the documents, the signatures, the video statement. He was efficient, calm, unbothered by the chaos. That was Gareth Holt, the man who believed in truth, no matter how inconvenient it might be. Meanwhile, Luca stood near the center of the room, isolated in a circle of emptiness. No one approached him. Even Blake Avery, the ever-smiling host, kept his distance, suddenly fascinated by his drink. I watched my son. The same man who had once filled every space with confidence now seemed smaller than I'd ever seen him. His tie hung loose, his face pale beneath the stage lights. He looked like a man staring at the ruins of something he didn't realize he destroyed himself. I wanted to feel vindicated. I thought I would. But as I looked at him, all I felt was a heavy sadness. He wasn't my enemy. He was my reflection, distorted by pride and shaped by everything I failed to teach. When he finally met my eyes, there was no anger left in his. Only shame. He took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, as if unsure whether he had the right to come closer. "Dad," his voice broke on the word. "I didn't mean." "Yes," I said quietly, cutting him off before he could lie to himself. "You did mean it, Luca. You meant every word. But I know why." He blinked, tears gathering but refusing to fall. "I was just trying to prove myself." "I know," I said. "You thought power would make you strong. You thought money would make you respected. But strength doesn't come from stepping on people. It comes from lifting them." He dropped his gaze. The arrogance that once armored him was gone, replaced by something almost childlike. For the first time in years, he looked like my son again, the boy who used to wait by the door for me to come home from work, holding a toy airplane in his hand. Eleanor turned to him. Her voice was gentle but firm. "You've spent so long trying to become your father's shadow that you forgot to be his legacy." That broke him. His shoulders shook, his breath catching, and when he finally spoke, it was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile, raw, and real. I nodded slowly. "I know. And that's enough for now." I stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't fix legacy with apologies, son. You fix it by how you live after the truth." He nodded, wiping his eyes, unable to speak. All around us, the guests began to disperse. Some came to shake my hand, muttering polite congratulations, their voices hollow with guilt. I didn't hold it against them. People always cheer for power until it changes sides. Gareth approached, placing a reassuring hand on my arm. "It's done," he said. "Everything's verified. Langston's letter will stand in court, if it ever comes to that." "Thank you," I said. "You've done more than you know." He smiled faintly. "Just doing what I promised." As he turned to leave, Eleanor slipped her arm around mine. Together, we stood in the fading light of a party that had started as a coronation and ended as a confession. Luca remained near the podium, his head bowed, the crowd thinning around him. I watched him for a long moment before we left, not as a victor watching his rival fall, but as a father watching his son learn what pain truly costs. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the faint sound of distant waves from the harbor below. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of unfinished truths pressing on my chest. Eleanor leaned her head against my shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked softly. I looked back toward the mansion, its light still burning behind us like the remnants of an empire. "Now," I said, "we start over. Not as kings and heirs. Just as a family if he chooses to be one again." A week had passed since that night, but the echoes of it still lingered everywhere, in the soft hum of the office corridors, in the quiet way employees greeted me again, and in the long pauses during meetings where people seemed afraid to speak first. Ward Enterprises, the empire that had been torn apart by ego and silence, was breathing again. But it was breathing differently now, slower, humbler, as if the walls themselves were learning to listen. I returned to my old office for the first time in years. The nameplate on the door still read Declan Ward, founder, though someone had once tried to remove it. I ran my fingers across the letters, the cool metal grounding me in the reality that I was still here. I hadn't been erased after all. Eleanor sat across from me, a quiet strength in her eyes. "You've been staring at that door for 10 minutes, she said with a small smile. "I built this company," I murmured. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot why." She nodded. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I remember." On my desk lay Theodore Langston's letter, preserved in a glass frame, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. His words had not only restored my name but also reminded me that legacy isn't measured by how loud your name echoes, but by what remains when the echoes fade. That morning, I made a decision that had been growing inside me since the moment I'd read the letter aloud. I called Gareth. He arrived that afternoon, the same calm, methodical presence he'd always been. "You're giving it away, aren't you?" he asked before I even spoke. I smiled. You always were a good reader of people. He chuckled. You're giving part of the company to charity, aren't you? Not part, I said. 30%. To the Langston Foundation. It's time something good came from all of this, something that doesn't carry my name or Luca's. Something built for others. He didn't argue. He only nodded, his eyes warm with quiet approval. Theodore would have liked that. So would the man I used to be, I said softly. Later that evening, as the last light of day filtered through the tall windows, Luca came to my office. He didn't knock. He just stood there, uncertain, his hands buried in his pockets like a boy waiting to be scolded. I wasn't sure you'd want to see me, he said. I wasn't sure you'd come, I replied. He stepped inside slowly, closing the door behind him. I saw the headlines, he said after a pause. They're calling you a legend again. I gave a dry laugh. They'll call anyone a legend if they think it'll sell enough stories. He hesitated, then said quietly, You're donating the shares. Yes. Why? Because power doesn't heal, Luca. Purpose does. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. I don't know if I can fix what I've done. You can't, I said. But you can start building something new. That's how we make peace with the past, not by rewriting it, but by outgrowing it. He looked up, eyes glassy but resolute. Then that's what I'll do. I studied him, the man he had become and the boy who still lived somewhere beneath the surface. You'll make mistakes, I said. Different ones than mine, maybe worse. But promise me one thing. He swallowed. Anything. When the time comes, and someone younger challenges you, don't crush them just to prove you're still strong. Teach them. Let them stand. He nodded slowly, the weight of those words settling between us. We stood there for a long time in silence, not the cold kind that had separated us for years, but a new one, heavy with understanding. Before he left, he said softly, Thank you for not giving up on me. I smiled. That's what fathers do, son. We keep holding the line, even when no one sees it. When he was gone, I turned toward the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The world outside moved on, deals to be made, names to be praised, fortunes to rise and fall. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about any of that. Because I finally understood what Theodore Langston had meant when he wrote, Do not let the ungrateful rewrite what you built. What he really meant was this, the truth will always outlive pride. I took the letter from its frame and folded it once more, sliding it into my jacket pocket. Not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder of mercy, the mercy to forgive, the strength to stand, and the wisdom to let go. As Eleanor joined me by the window, she slipped her hand into mine. Do you feel lighter? She asked. Yes, I said, watching the city glow beneath us. Because for the first time, legacy doesn't feel like a burden. She smiled. And Luca? I thought about him, about the broken pieces of pride slowly becoming something more human. He'll learn, I said. The truth will teach him just like it taught me. Outside, the sky deepened into quiet darkness. The night no longer felt heavy. For the first time in years, I wasn't chasing redemption. I was living it.